August 2025, the Sahel region of northern Burkina Faso. The air is a furnace. Sand shimmers like molten glass. The sky, pale and merciless, presses down on the cracked earth. In the distance, a boy drags a yellow jerry can across the clay. His shadow stretches long, but his can is empty. His steps trace the most valuable currency in his country, water, yet none exists here. Only silence, dust, and heat. And then came the order. A single command from the highest office. Bury it, not oil, not gold, but water. Millions of gallons of fresh, purified, treated water, intentionally buried beneath the dunes of the Sahel, sealed deep under sand. To the outside world, the move looked insane. To thirsty villagers, it seemed cruel. But to President Ibrahim Traoré, it was not madness, it was war. Because in Burkina Faso, rain is not seasonal, it is political. This is a country with no coastline, no great rivers, no glaciers melting upstream. Rainfall is stingy, barely 600 millimeters a year. In the north it is far less. Each well becomes a front line. Farmer against farmer, villagers against corporations, soldiers against despair. One spilled bucket can destroy a harvest. One dry month can starve a region. So why would a leader hide water underground while his people thirsted? That question baffled international observers from Geneva to Washington. But Traoré wasn't playing by colonial logic. His answer wasn't delivered in speeches. It came through pumps, pipes, and sand. Behind closed doors, the plan was labeled Directive 44B. The world would come to know it by another name, Project Silent Reservoir, a secret network of artificial reservoirs buried beneath the desert. Thousands of barrels of desalinated water, injected below the sand, wrapped in hydrophobic membranes, protected from evaporation, theft, and sabotage. AI-driven monitoring systems built in Ouagadougou tracked every liter, powered by solar microgrids, designed by Burkina Faso engineers under 30. No French contractors, no IMF oversight, no UN blueprint. Only local minds, local tools, local control. Its purpose was not charity, it was sovereignty. For years, Burkina Faso had suffered a slow collapse. The rains became shorter, less predictable, crops failed again and again, wells dried up, cattle collapsed along the banks of rivers that no longer existed. By 2024, rainfall in some provinces barely reached 500 millimeters, a threshold scientists call non-survivable for subsistence farming. The United Nations labeled the Sahel the world's most climate-vulnerable region. But for farmers in Tapoa or Oudalan, that wasn't a headline, it was breakfast. No water meant no food meant no future. Villages emptied. Children left school to walk 20 kilometers for a single bucket. By 2025, more than 1.6 million. Burkina Faso had been displaced, not only by conflict, but by thirst. Officials began to use a chilling term, hydro-exodus. A mass migration not caused by bombs, but by dust. Not by warlords, but by weather. President Traoré looked at the numbers and said aloud what others whispered. If Burkina Faso depends only on the clouds, we die. He called it the silent genocide of climate neglect. So he turned to a radical philosophy. Don't spend water, store it. Don't build dams that evaporate in the sun. Hide it, protect it, and wait. His engineers began burying desalinated reserves, creating subsurface hydration bunkers. Unlike traditional dams, these underground vaults could not evaporate in the 45-degree sun. Unlike open reservoirs, they could not be poisoned, stolen, or drained overnight. It was an invisible fortress of water. To Western donors, the project looked reckless, even dangerous. Billions of liters hidden underground while aid agencies scrambled to truck water into refugee camps. They called it wasteful. They called it cruel. But Traoré framed it differently. The West guards uranium like gold and oil like life itself. Why should Africa not guard water the same way? And he was right about the bigger picture. Global studies warn that by 2030, demand for fresh water will exceed supply by 40%. Rivers will spark wars. Crops will collapse. Water will be worth more than oil. Traoré simply decided that Burkina Faso would not be caught unprepared. But what about the people living through this drought? In the north, villagers dig for hours with bare hands, hoping to find a muddy sip beneath the clay. In the south, mothers boil rainwater scraped from corrugated roofs, if it rains at all. In Ouagadougou, the capital, water treatment plants operate at less than half capacity, while the city's population has doubled in 15 years. The result? Rationing, unrest, and a black market for water. At first glance, the crisis looks unstoppable. But beneath the ground, a silent revolution is underway. Invisible rivers of stored water, hidden, sealed, waiting, like insurance against the apocalypse. Still, doubts remain. Who controls the valves? When famine strikes, who decides which village drinks and which one waits? Can a poor nation afford to bury its lifeline while children suffer today? The questions echo louder than pumps or pipelines. But Traoré's answer is firm. We are not hiding water. We are protecting the future. If we drink everything today, tomorrow our children will inherit dust. And with that, Burkina Faso rewrote the global conversation on survival. But Project Silent Reservoir was only the beginning, because even as secret vaults of water filled beneath the Sahel sands, another discovery threatened to change everything. A vast hidden aquifer, fossil water from the Ice Age, untouched for 40,000 years, deep beneath Burkina Faso's northern plateau. Water so ancient it cannot be replaced. Water that could save lives or destroy futures. And Ibrahim Traoré faced a choice no leader had ever faced before: drink the inheritance of his ancestors, or guard it for children yet unborn. The drills stopped, the readings came in, and silence fell across the room. Beneath the sandstone crust of northern Burkina Faso, deeper than any known river, older than any map, lay a secret reservoir, not of oil, not of gas, but of something far rarer in this parched land: fossil water. Formed between 10,000 and 40,000 years ago, this water was trapped underground since the last ice age, locked in rock chambers, untouched by modern pollution, immune to drought. Geologists had whispered about it for decades. Villagers told legends of the sleeping river. But in 2024, government scientists confirmed it. Vast, non-renewable aquifers stretched beneath the northern plateau, from Dori to the fringes of Djibo. It was a discovery that could change the fate of the nation. But it came with a warning. Unlike rain-fed aquifers, fossil water cannot be replenished. Once pumped, it is gone forever. President Ibrahim Traoré framed it in stark words: "Do not spend your ancestors' fortune without leaving a single coin for your children." For a country where mothers walk miles for muddy buckets, fossil water looked like salvation, a permanent well, a miracle beneath the dust. But Traoré saw the danger: temptation, corruption, short-term survival at the cost of long-term extinction. So he acted quickly. In early 2025, his administration passed Decree 2304B, a law that treated fossil water not as a resource, but as a strategic asset. It was now placed in the same legal category as uranium and gold. Unauthorized drilling carried the same penalties as illegal mining: confiscation of equipment, criminal prosecution, and reparations to the state. For the first time in Africa, water was declared a non-renewable national treasure. The law wasn't just symbolic. It introduced strict conditions. Villages tapping fossil aquifers could only do so under emergency permits. Any extraction had to be paired with offset projects like rainwater catchment or solar-powered desalination. Every liter pumped from ancient reserves had to be matched by new investments in replenishable water systems. It was a balancing act: life today versus life tomorrow. For farmers in Ouaddalan, the rules felt harsh. For officials in Ouagadougou, they felt visionary. For the international community, they felt dangerous. The discovery of fossil water ignited global interest. Mining firms sniffed opportunity. Foreign governments offered partnerships. Aid agencies proposed emergency wells, but Traoré refused. He declared fossil water non-exportable. No company, no contract, no international donor would have access to it. This angered investors in Europe and America. They saw Burkina Faso sitting on a fortune and refusing to monetize it. They called it irrational nationalism. But to the Burkinabe president, the logic was simple. Oil made Africa rich for outsiders and poor for its own children. I will not let water follow the same path. Inside Burkina Faso, the policy sparked heated debate. Some ministers argued the water should be pumped immediately to fight famine. Opposition voices claimed Traoré was burying hope while children starve. Villagers asked, why guard a treasure underground while people die above it? Traoré's response was brutal but honest. If we drink everything today, we die tomorrow, and the world will not save us. They will only sell us our own water at a price. His words hit like a hammer. For some, he was a savior. For others, a dictator hoarding life itself. Meanwhile, in the Sahel's northern plains, life grew harder. Crops withered under skies that refused to open. Children abandoned classrooms to fetch water from shrinking wells. Herds collapsed along dust roads. In refugee camps near Kaya, women carried stories of villages abandoned, not from violence, but thirst, and yet beneath their feet, an invisible ocean slept. Untouched, guarded, protected by laws no one fully understood. It was a cruel paradox, salvation buried deeper than hope. In Brussels and Paris, analysts saw opportunity. They knew fossil aquifers stretched not only beneath Burkina Faso, but across Chad, Niger, Mali, and Sudan. If one country declared them off-limits, others might follow, and that could block billions in future contracts for water drilling and extraction. Western media began painting Traoré as reckless, irrational, even dangerous. But in African capitals, the opposite happened. Young engineers and students began quoting him like scripture. Water is not a commodity, it is a legacy. The idea spread beyond borders. If oil had shaped 20th century geopolitics, perhaps water would define the 21st. By mid-2025, a new kind of battle emerged. Foreign firms attempted to bribe local chiefs for secret drilling rights. Smugglers sold fake maps of aquifers. Some villages, desperate, drilled illegally under cover of night. The government responded with Operation Blue Shield, deploying security forces to guard aquifer zones like military bases. Drones patrolled well sites. Satellite surveillance tracked unauthorized activity. The message was clear. Burkina Faso would defend its fossil water like others defend nuclear stockpiles. But beyond the politics and the science, there was something deeper. A shift in identity. For decades, Africa was told it lacked resources, lacked power, lacked agency. But now, here was a poor, landlocked country declaring, we may be dry above ground, but beneath us lies the most precious inheritance on earth, and it belongs only to us. This was no longer just about water. It was about rewriting the very narrative of sovereignty. Still, one question loomed larger than all the rest. How long could Burkina Faso resist temptation? What happens when famine worsens, when aid trucks vanish, when foreign powers offer billions in exchange for just one pipeline into the fossil reserves? Would the country defend its legacy, or trade its children's tomorrow for survival today? That test was coming faster than anyone imagined, because in April 2025, Traoré signed an agreement that shocked the world. A landlocked country with no sea was about to import the ocean itself. Burkina Faso was building a pipeline to the Atlantic. The news broke like thunder across the Sahel. April 2025. Against every expectation, against every law of geography, Burkina Faso, a country with no coast, no river ports, no maritime rights, announced it had secured permanent access to the Atlantic Ocean. Not for trade, not for fishing, for water. The deal was simple on paper, but seismic in effect. Two treaties signed in parallel, one with Guinea, another with Côte d'Ivoire. Both nations agreed to grant Burkina Faso legal corridors, arteries carved across sovereign borders, so seawater could flow inland toward a nation desperate for survival. At the signing ceremony, the cameras flashed, diplomats whispered, and international Observers looked stunned. This was no ordinary agreement. It was a declaration of intent. For decades, landlocked nations were told they were prisoners of geography, condemned to dependency on their neighbors' goodwill. But here stood Ibrahim Traoré, smiling faintly as he placed his signature, rewriting the very meaning of sovereignty. Through steel and law, he had pulled the sea itself into his nation's future. The first project was named Corridor Blue. Ground broke near San Pedro on Côte d'Ivoire's coast. From there, a pipeline would snake eastward, carrying raw seawater more than 800 kilometers into Burkina Faso. At Benora, engineers began assembling the country's first high-pressure desalination corridor, fitted with reverse osmosis membranes, solar-powered pumps, and mineral balancing units. The numbers were staggering. 100,000 gallons of seawater transformed into drinkable water each day. It was costly. It was risky. It was, to critics, insane. But Traoré looked into the television cameras and said words that stunned both allies and rivals. Life has never been cheap. If there is a price to secure it for our children, then let us be the ones who pay it. To ordinary Burkinabe, those words rang like a promise. In Dano, women who had carried jerry cans their entire lives whispered that maybe in a few years their daughters would not have to. In Gawa, where wells had turned to dust, people began sketching their dreams of irrigated gardens, of children drinking without fear of cholera. In Leo, elders remembered years when the rains failed 3 times in a row. Perhaps, they said, history was bending. But outside Burkina Faso, the reaction was sharp. Economists called it financially reckless. A country with one of the lowest GDPs in the world investing in some of the most expensive water infrastructure known to man, wrote one French analyst. World Bank officials worried about debt, sustainability, and political will. European contractors, furious they had been sidelined, leaked memos predicting collapse within 5 years. Still, Traoré pressed forward. He invited not consultants from Brussels but engineers from India and Algeria, nations with decades of desert water experience. He ordered solar fields expanded to power the desalination units. Salt byproducts were diverted into industrial reuse, and villages along the new lines began to witness what they had not seen in decades: clean, reliable water flowing in the middle of a dry season. To the people, this was not a budget item, it was a miracle. But to Traoré, it was something else. Entirely defiance, a rejection of geography, of dependency, of colonial logic. For centuries, maps defined the Sahel as a place of limits. He wanted to turn it into a place of invention. We may be landlocked, he told Parliament, but no one can lock our imagination. And yet, with each valve sealed and each kilometer of pipe buried, the stakes grew higher. Security forces were deployed along the construction routes, not against rebels or terrorists this time, but against sabotage, because water had become a target. Intelligence briefings warned of foreign actors seeking to disrupt the project, of rival governments uneasy with Burkina Faso's precedent. For if one of Africa's poorest nations could pull the sea into its veins, what excuse remained for the rest? On the ground, the transformation began quietly. In Koudougou, farmers saw their first trickle of piped freshwater, allowing them to plant dry-season crops in fields long abandoned. In Bobo Dioulasso, women's cooperatives began testing hydroponic tomatoes, nourished by desalinated water instead of rain. In Ouagadougou, new biomedical labs cooled their servers with water from an underground storage hub fed by the invisible pipeline. Invisible. That's what they began calling it, the river beneath the sand, because satellites couldn't see it. Tourists couldn't photograph it. Yet across the cracked red clay of Burkina Faso, a man-made artery was beginning to flow. Foreign journalists struggled to describe it. Was it an engineering project, a gamble, a miracle? Or was it, as Traoré's supporters called it, the birth of a doctrine, proof that climate was not destiny? And yet, under the triumph, fear lingered. Farmers asked if the new supply would reach every province or only the capital. Ministers worried about maintenance costs, about energy demands, about attacks on the corridor. Opposition voices argued that the money should have gone to food, to housing, to schools, and international critics sharpened their knives. But in markets and mosques, in classrooms and crowded courtyards, people spoke of something else. Hope. That word, so fragile, so rare in the Sahel, was flowing again like water after drought. A landlocked nation had signed a treaty with the sea, and in that act, millions felt history bend. Still, the question remained, how far could this go? How long before rivals, corporations, or even neighbors decided that Burkina Faso's invisible river was too great a threat to ignore? Because beneath every celebration lay a fact as hard as iron. In a century where climate is currency, the most dangerous weapon may not be guns or gold, but pipes buried in silence, carrying life itself. And that's when whispers began of the next phase. Not just a corridor, not just a plant, but an entire underground grid, a second Nile, built in steel, stretching across Burkina Faso. The project had a name, quiet, technical, almost unbelievable. The Invisible River. The wind howls across the Yatenga plains. The sun glares like a furnace, bleaching the land into silence. To the naked eye, there is nothing but scorched earth, cracked soil, and skeletal trees clawing at a merciless sky. But below that silence, beneath the dust and clay, something moves. Not rain, not thunder, not a river gifted by nature, but pressure, pumps, valves, steel. A current born not of clouds, but of human will. They call it the Invisible River. By mid-2025, what began as a treaty, a corridor, a gamble, had transformed into a subterranean network unlike anything West Africa had ever seen. Over 1,200 kilometers of buried thermoplastic pipelines stitched together the veins of Burkina Faso. High-pressure pumps, powered by solar microgrids, pulsed desalinated seawater inland from Côte d'Ivoire and Guinea. At intervals, underground. Reservoirs, hydration bunkers sealed against evaporation and theft, stored millions of gallons of water beneath engineered dunes. From the surface, there was nothing to see. But underground, a nation was rewriting its destiny. The scale was staggering. In Koudougou, the pipes fed drip irrigation hubs, allowing farmers to grow maize and millet even in the heart of the dry season. In Kaya, once synonymous with thirst and displacement, water now poured into emergency tanks, feeding refugee camps and stabilizing communities once on the brink of exodus. In Bobo Dioulasso, hydroponic farms rose, producing lettuce and tomatoes, under solar domes, watered by the underground flow. In Ouagadougou, even the new data centers of Burkina's sovereign cloud used closed-loop cooling systems fed by desalinated water. This was not aid. It was not charity. It was sovereignty measured in liters per second. President Ibrahim Traoré framed it bluntly in a July 2025 broadcast. Some nations were born with rivers. We built ours beneath the sand. For our children. For the next century. The words landed like a challenge not just to Africa, but to the world. For centuries, Burkina Faso was dismissed as geography's prisoner, a landlocked desert state with no rivers, no sea, no hope but what aid agencies brought in their convoys. But now it had summoned its own river, silent and unseen, flowing, beneath its feet. International reactions bordered on disbelief. UN climate envoys called it ambitious beyond precedent. The World Bank labeled it fiscally reckless. French think tanks dismissed it as unsustainable. But on the ground, the proof was undeniable. Villages once abandoned were planting again. Mothers who once walked 20 kilometers for a bucket now opened communal taps. Children who studied by candlelight now lived in homes with clean water and solar power. And for the first time in living memory, the Burkinabe were not waiting for clouds. But with each success, the pressure rose. Corporations who once sold water futures whispered about the Burkina model, destabilizing markets. Neighboring states quietly asked if the underground grid extended near their borders and what that meant for their own sovereignty. Reports surfaced of drones circling construction sites, of foreign agents trying to map the pipeline's course. For water is not neutral, it is currency, it is weapon, it is survival. The Invisible River was not just an engineering marvel. It was a geopolitical rupture. In mosques and markets, in classrooms and crowded courtyards, people spoke of it with reverence. Some compared it to the pyramids, others to the Aswan High Dam. But all agreed, it was proof. Proof that Africa could build what the world said was impossible. Proof that sovereignty was no longer a speech, but a system. Yet even as crops returned and wells refilled, a darker question lingered. What happens when those who profit from scarcity realize Burkina Faso has escaped the trap? What happens when a nation once dismissed as powerless begins to hold the most valuable resource of the century beneath its soil? Already rumors spread of a secret reservoir mapped beneath the sandstone north of Dori, a fossil aquifer untouched since the Ice Age. To some, it was salvation. To Traoré, it was inheritance, a resource so finite that to spend it recklessly would be to betray unborn generations. His administration placed it under the same legal protection as uranium and gold. Unauthorized drilling carried the same penalty as illegal mining. Supporters called it statesmanship. Critics called it paranoia. But to the people, it was simple. Finally, a leader who treated water not as charity, but as treasure. And then came the speech that would echo across the continent. Standing before the nation, Traoré declared, "We did not wait for the clouds. We did not wait for permission. We did not wait for aid. We acted. And now, beneath our feet, a river flows, not of charity, but of courage. This is not just water. This is independence." Applause roared. Farmers wept. Young engineers held up blueprints as if they were flags. In that moment, Burkina Faso, long dismissed as one of the poorest countries on earth, had turned its greatest weakness into its greatest weapon. The invisible river was more than infrastructure. It was a doctrine, a signal to Africa and to the world that climate is not destiny, that survival is not charity, and that sovereignty can be engineered drop by drop, pipe by pipe, choice by choice. And so the question now echoes far beyond the Sahel, louder than any pump or turbine. If Burkina Faso can build a river in the desert, if a landlocked nation can pull the sea into its soil, if a people once condemned to thirst can turn dust into life, then what excuse remains for the rest of us?